Hello everyone, my name is Tom, and call me crazy, but I feel like sitcoms are about to make a comeback. Now you might be thinking, what are you even talking about? Sitcoms haven't gone anywhere. And you'd be right. It's possible that maybe the whole premise for this video is me trying to justify my own shower-thought perception of the culture and the times, but humor me for a minute. It's no secret that over time, the cultural significance of sitcoms has started to fade. I know there are plenty of sitcoms still on the air, but I don't think many people under the age of 40 are making a point to watch Last Man Standing.
I wanted to plant azaleas, and you were so against it because you thought they would make our yard look too busy.
To qualify this hypothesis, I need to say I'm referring mostly to studio-style sitcoms with some wiggle room. Even if something like Malcolm in the Middle doesn't look the same as something like Drake and Josh or The George Lopez Show. I think the content, the themes, and the voice are similar enough to categorize them as the same thing, compared to new shows like Modern Family or The Good Place, where even if they technically are sitcoms, the presentation evolved into an entirely new format. The change was definitely gradual, partly through sitcoms like The Office, Malcolm in the Middle, Scrubs, and I think Community was one of the first big sitcoms that really started making noticeable changes towards the newer style we know today. Which is to be expected. Sitcoms have always been evolving. Over time, you saw fewer sitcoms like The Brady Bunch or Full House about wholesome and clean-cut nuclear families, and the norm shifted towards working-class families or friend groups that are struggling with common problems that plague society, or they end up in ridiculously unrealistic situations because of common problems. Therefore, the sitcom went from an art of creating a perfect world to an art of reflecting the pain of the world in a way that was entertaining and comforting, making jokes about marriage issues, authoritarian parents, infidelity, money problems, romance problems, coming-of-age problems, say no to drugs, the promise tomorrow. Then, as the tropes became familiar, the presentation started changing to, instead of having a clearly identified set where the characters and world exist, sitcoms started taking on a mockumentary, reality TV, or just more cinematic style of shooting, completely changing how we experience these stories. Now, to me, I do think these shows advance the genre of sitcoms, but not nearly as much as they kind of branch off into something else entirely new, because the content itself hasn't really changed. The same situations come up and most of the lessons are the same, just with a modern coat of paint. If you call it a subgenre or what, I'm not sure, but my point is that the good old studio sitcom has been neglected for a while now in favor of aesthetic development, leaving room for growth in the actual content, especially in the classic format. And to some extent, the need for the classic format is definitely questionable. Maybe the newer production is actually just another step in the development of sitcoms, making them more appealing, and that's a change in the norm that just needs to be accepted as the new standard. But I disagree. In fact, the new AMC dark comedy, Kevin Can Fack Himself, alternates between styles to help frame the narrative. Though the show is kind of criticizing the idealism and tropes historically used in sitcoms, it also demonstrates an intrinsic purpose to that form of cinematography. By switching back and forth, the show is able to capture extremely intense feelings of angst, dread, and tension, then dampen the tension on a dime just with lighting and camera angles. This demonstrates that sitcoms use this style because it's more digestible. You get to be a fly on the wall and experience everything that happens from an arm's length without being too intimate, witnessing the issues happen to characters you care about as opposed to experiencing those issues through them. And you can prefer the more cinematic styles, but being able to sit down, turn your brain off, and just watch a story unfold that demands very little mental energy from you is a form of escape that I believe is coming back into demand, especially among us young folk and all our existential dread. And I know because I really like sitcoms. Fun fact about me, I used to have a normal, healthy sleep schedule until I started staying up late every night watching The Nanny and Family Matters on Nick at Night, all because I woke up to George Lopez slow jumping with Low Rider in the background a few too many times. Nickelodeon, for much of my generation between millennials and Gen Z, introduced us to the medium of sitcoms, both through their late night programming and through their own content. It is a staple of our generation to have grown up watching Kenan and Kel, Drake and Josh, iCarly, Victorious, and many more. And Disney definitely contributed too, with Zack and Cody, Hannah Montana, That's So Raven, Wizards of Waverly Place. But even if Disney was capable of making commercially successful and even critically successful sitcoms, Nickelodeon almost felt like it had a mission to educate us on the full spectrum of the genre through their heavy syndicated programs. Just think of how many sitcoms we may have never watched or even heard of without Nick at Night's lineup. Next thing you know, a lot of millennials, Gen Zs, millennials, whatever we're calling them, were watching Friends, How I Met Your Mother, and like generations before us, sitcoms became a staple of our entertainment and even our identity, to the point where if you're trying to casually date now as a person in their 20s, watching The Office gives you an automatic passive buff. But it's no secret that over time, the cultural significance of the classic style sitcom, and even sitcoms in general, started to fade. Around the early to mid 2010s, sitcoms started being produced almost exclusively for polar ends of age demographics, in Nick and Disney making very child-aimed sitcoms, and Primetime making sitcoms for older audiences, leaving the most neglected bracket of young adults in a dead zone after we were cultivated for this style of content. But it was also a gradual process. The reach of Nick and Disney sitcoms didn't suddenly die all at once. More people started dropping off as they got older. And part of this was from the fact that for Disney and Nickelodeon, sitcoms had been such an easy cash-in up until that point. Then the returns started diminishing, with only the fresh young demographic still retaining interest, and even that was fleeting as those people got older. A good sitcom requires a certain level of self-awareness, that it is a very cheesy and formulaic production, while also respecting the text in a balance that doesn't insult the viewer's intelligence, while also not demanding too much from the viewer. But most importantly, the characters and their situations have to be personal enough to build a genuine connection with the audience. It's an easy mark to hit, if you have the right factors, which is easier said than done and nearly impossible if you don't. If there is no conflict for the story to confront, no voice that echoes something within the audience, nothing that makes the show feel real in some capacity, even if that reality is isolated to the world it takes place in, then you're just not gonna hit that mark. So once you get to the point where your premises are less about portraying a human experience and more about manufacturing a platform for the next child star on your roster, it's hard to recognize any merits a show may have, and even harder to ignore any faults. And networks across the board clamoring for a reliable show to slap on their primetime slots has also led to a lot of stories that should have ended a few seasons earlier, when the norm was changing too much to maintain the core pillars, and or when actors playing fan favorites went on to greener pastures. And this is something that plagues even new sitcoms. And this is also why sitcoms are great for syndication, because they usually don't air after that point in a series. I still have never seen season 9 of Scrubs, and I don't think I need to. But even if there were material factors in us losing interest in sitcoms, I think at the end of the day, it was a phenomenon for millennials and older Gen Z that had its time come and go. But that all started about 10 to 20 years ago now, which based on the life cycle of trends means that we are due for a revival right about now. I genuinely think that we have had enough time away from the sitcom craze that the world is ready for sitcoms to come back into fashion. If you don't believe me, one of the biggest signs that the 80s aesthetic and tropes were making a comeback was Stranger Things. That was what marked when 80s pop culture was starting to find its way back into modern pop culture. And now, one of the biggest shows on streaming in the last year, WandaVision, made spoofing sitcoms a huge narrative frame and aesthetic for the public image of the show. And honestly, ever since WandaVision came out, I've been seeing more and more in my online algorithms, on social media, and in the overall public discourse, a larger focus on sitcoms and a nostalgia for them among young adults. And the first taste we're getting in this renaissance is iCarly. As iCarly has been preparing and executing their return, the people who grew up with the show have been all over it. And you might be thinking, this is normal, iCarly was a very popular show, so a success of a comeback is to be expected. Therefore, it doesn't mean anything as far as the genre as a whole when it's successful. But it's incredibly important to note that we have been getting sitcom revivals out the wazoo for a hot minute now. That's So Raven made a comeback. Boy Meets World became Girl Meets World. Roseanne came back until it became clear Roseanne spends way too much time in Facebook groups, and now it's just the Connors. Fuller House, Saved by a Bell, iCarly is far from the first to do this. But why was iCarly the show that was the one that people latched onto? Maybe it's because it's more recent, which is actually kind of what I think, but not for the reason that you might think. When I watch the new iCarly, I don't see it as, hey look, we can still make money off this property. I mean, that's there, but that's not it. I see characters that I have a relationship with, who are about my age, having experiences that I've had that's just performative and stupid enough to be kinda comforting.
I know I'm supposed to be editing, but want to watch every single one of them?
I'm not going to claim that the iCarly revival is a holy grail of writing, but it's the first time I've seen a sitcom hit that mark in a very long time. Because I don't think good or tasteful writing is what makes a sitcom impactful. It's when it's mind-numbing and stupid, but there's something familiar and comforting about it. It's a feeling that I haven't had in a long time, and it's a feeling that I'm just now realizing how much I missed. And maybe I'm alone in that. but maybe I'm not. And as much as I love a show like The Good Place, which is probably the best sitcom I've seen in recent years, it had value in the fact that it was a good show with a creative premise, not because it was a good sitcom. That feeling I'm talking about wasn't there. Sure, I liked the characters and felt a connection with them, but it wasn't the connection that made me ruin my sleep schedule when I was a kid. And this is why I think we've been seeing more and more nostalgia for this media, and why I think a successful revival like iCarly could have a ripple effect and lead to us seeing a whole new generation of sitcoms that carry a similar style to what we remember. But this is definitely a topic where I want to hear what you think. Do you think there could be a renaissance here, or do you just want to tell us what some of your favorite sitcoms are? You can do that in the comments down below, or find us at Roundtable Vids on social media, and find myself at TommyPQM, and give me a follow on Twitter, Instagram, Twitch. Also, make sure to give this video a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the bell to never miss a video. Shout out to all our channel members and patrons on Patreon. My name is Tom, I hope you have an awesome day, and I will see you next time. See ya!